first thing you're going to do is drain the coolant out of the radiator. So you find the drain plug with a catch pan underneath it, open it up. Once you get the drain plug opened and a catch pan, you can always open the radiator cap at this point and it will stop the suction, so it will come out a lot faster, even flow. So the radiator shroud is split in half, so it sits in grooves. There's 3 studs with nuts on them holding it on. So you got one there, one here, and then one right over here. And they seem to be just a 10mm wrench or socket. And we're just going to take them right off, see if we can lift that shroud up. Then you can take the top half of the shroud right out of the way. So now we're going to take the reservoir tank for the washer fluid and the coolant reservoir tank. It's the top part of the shroud. We're going to take the 2 connectors off for the motors. We have the wiper washer motor, and then we have the coolant level sensor. So you're just going to squeeze the plastic tab, pull up. Same on the gray one, pull up. Just take the hose off and put on a rubber boot, like a cap, rubber cap, stop that flow. So you're going to disconnect, there's 3 mounting bolts that I can see of, 10mm socket. Over here on the passenger side, you can see it's right below those sensors, the washer fluid level sensor. We'll just take this one out, and there's 2 on the other side. I'm going to take the upper radiator hose off so you can see the mounting bolts. It's got to come off at some time, so let's take it off now. That's just an 8mm socket or 5/16 for that clamp. So I'm going to disconnect this radiator overflow hose. Now I can just push this aside. See, now we can see that one better. So correction, there's only 2 mounting bolts for all these washer fluid reservoir and the coolant reservoir. The other bolt underneath that I saw is actually for the electric motor. So now that everything's disconnected, I'm just going to lift it right up and set it aside. So now we have the electric fan in the way. So there's 2 mounting bolts, one here and one over there, but the harness is molded into this little electric motor and it runs down and it goes under the shroud, so you have to go underneath to disconnect it. Here's the connector for the electric fan, and it's got that safety lock in it. It's that little red tab. Push it down. Sometimes I use a flathead screwdriver. Sorry, I gotta put my hands in there. Let's take it from there. I'm gonna use a pair of pliers and see if I can work this. There we go. Lovely. Did you see all the sand come out? Push down on this tab and you can disconnect the electrical connector. Wow. While you're down underneath the vehicle, you can see that there's a bolt here and a bolt on the same location on the other side for the radiator shroud, so you're going to want to do those 2. 10mm socket, and just break them free. And here is the one located on the passenger side. Now the bolts are undone. All we have to do is lift this up and we can just literally move it forward with the engine. And now we're going to take our electric fan out. You have 3 mounting bolts for this electric fan. You have 1 on the passenger side and 2 on the driver's side. 10mm socket. Take those right out. But we have these mounting bar. This mounting bar is right in the way of this bolt. So 13mm socket. We'll take the top 2 bolts out. Now I am not going to undo those bolts because I don't feel I need to. So I'm just going to take this bar and push it towards the engine. Now I can clearly get at this bolt. Take that bottom bolt out. Now we can just lift that right up. So now I'm going to take this hose off on the passenger side. I guess technically it's the lower hose, even though it's not down on the bottom. It's midway. Oh, let me just loosen that hose up. Pry it right off. Now we're in the front of the vehicle. You can see the AC condenser is attached to the radiator. And it's not bolted, it looks like it's just fitting down into these little slotted plastic containers. Do not take this bolt off. So we're going to take a body clip, get this little shroud out of the way so you can actually see what we have to do here. So this is the AC condenser, and it has a plastic slot for the top. And the bottom are supposed to be bolted in, but this has been done before, and they didn't put the bolts in, so they wire tied them. So I'm just going to cut off the wire ties on both sides, and then we'll remove that condenser from the radiator and go from there. So now I cut the wire clips on the bottom, the wire ties, and I'm just going to lift up to get these little tabs out of the plastic part of the radiator. And I'm just going to move it forward enough. 10mm socket. One here and one here. Okay, my friends, so we've got this all ready to go, but you have this radiator support on the top in the way. 13mm socket, you're going to have one bolt here, one bolt there, and then one in the front, and it repeats on the other side. All right, so don't be afraid to take a pry bar or a screwdriver just to help wedge this out a little bit on both sides. There we go. And now I'm just going to place this up here, out of the way. Now, look at that. You can just bring it straight up. So the new radiator comes with all these new clips that you're going to need, but it does not come with this bottom bushing. You got two of them right here. You got to take those off, and the two top round bushings with the spacers on them. You have to take those. So if you look at the bottom mounts, they're pretty distinct which one goes where. So I've got a flat piece that lines perfectly up with that. And this one is curved for the actual frame, the way it runs. And that goes there. Make sure your drain is tight. And then we're going to go to the side and install the hardware that it came with. So the square washers, you want that little knurl part that sticks out to be the last thing that goes in, and it has like a little self-lock. You'll hear it snap. So that way when you tilt the radiator, they don't fall out. And then the clips, you're going to put the bolts so that they go on the inside. And then repeat the same steps on the other side. Then you have your top bushings. See, one is wider than the other, so we're going to put the flat spot going inward. And also don't forget the spot that the condenser goes. That used to have wire ties, so we're going to have to supply some 2 bolts will get out of stock. So now you've got everything in place. Let's put it right back in. There you go. So if you can see down in here, in the subframe, the frame of the radiator support, there's these slots. And that's where those tongue and groove kind of fit. Then we can pick our AC condenser up and line it up with these slots. And just pop it down. So the replacement bolt for the AC condenser down below instead of wire tie is a 6mm by 1.0 pitch. And they'll go right into the flat nuts that the radiator supplies. Nice. Much better than wire ties. And then you're just going to do the same to the other side. And you just snug this up, and same with the other side. It's a 10mm socket. So now we're going to put the cross member on the top back on. And all you got to do is make sure you line it up. Line it up. So now we're just going to line up the 6 bolts, just 3 on each side. And if it doesn't line up, let's see if this side does. Yep. Slide them by hand, and then we'll just get a little rubber mallet. You can always just tap it and line it up. I'm not going to really tighten them up until they're all bottomed out. Okay, I'm going to tighten her up. So now we can put the actual radiator support mounting bolts in, these long ones, and just line it right up. Slide it by hand, 10mm socket. There'll be no torque specs on this. It's just a rubber bushing, so you just tighten them down. Put the body clips back on. Now we're going to put the electric fan motor in. Remember to put the wire underneath that shroud. Then you can just line it up. So I'm going to put the top one in first. Just start it by hand. I'll get the single one over on this side. You just want to snug these because you'll break the plastic here if you just rank on it. The one last bottom one here. So we're just going to bring this bar back. So we have one bolt here and one on the same side. Not the same side, one on the other side, just like it. Now we can connect our electric fan. I got all the sand out, I hope. And then we'll just line it up, click it. There you go. Yep. And we can put that lock in, that red tab. And then see these two plastic little pitons? They're gonna go in that hole. Two line-up holes. There we go. Now the harness is out of the way of the road. So now we're gonna put the hose back on the passenger side. I like to line up the hoses the exact way they were, because if not, sometimes you get leaks. So I know that it's sat right about there, and you can feel the grooves where it's sat in. That is a 8mm or 5/16 socket. Now before I put the upper hose on, I'm going to put the reservoirs back on, the washer fluid tank and the radiator reservoir. And you can see that there's slots that it lines up on the bottom shroud. Okay, perfect. And then you get your 2 bolts. That's why I keep the upper hose off, because this is so much easier to get to. Just going to use the socket extension to start this bolt. It's easier to line that up. That way I can wheel this around to line it up. There we go. And get the other side. Now I'm going to put the washer fluid hose back on, take off my little rubber boot, and put the connectors back on. So the gray one was in the front. That's the level sensor, and here's the motor, washer motor. So now I'm going to put the upper part of the shroud on before I put that upper hose on, just to make it easier. So there's a little cutout over here that's going to slide in. And then that hole lines up on that bolt. The same over here. See that little slot lines up. And then the studs go through. You get 1, 2. Third one broke on me, but I'm not worried about that. Now we can put the upper radiator hose back on. Like I said before, I like to line up the clamp the way it was. 8mm or 5/16 socket. Now let's find the overflow hose from that reservoir and hook it up. It's right here. Now all we gotta do is add fluid.